At T-Mobile, our critical mission is providing unparalleled 5G coverage for when connectivity is mission critical. Introducing T-Priority, America's best 5G network experience for first responders, even in times of congestion. More capacity, faster speeds, better coverage. T-Priority from T-Mobile, built for tomorrow's emergencies, ready today. Discover more at t-priority.com.
For qualifying organizations on eligible rate plans, coverage not available in some areas and may be impacted by emergencies.
Support comes from ServiceNow. We're for people doing the creative work they actually want to do. That's why this ad was written and read by a real person and not AI. You know what people don't want to do? Boring, busy work. Now with AI agents built into the ServiceNow platform, you can automate millions of repetitive tasks in every corner of your business, IT, HR, and more, so your people can focus on the work that they want to do. That's putting AI agents to work for people. It's your turn. Visit servicenow.com.
And I really wanted to connect to the older brother that did know about me. And I just don't know how yet, because he didn't respond to my one Facebook message, but that was before I knew. So I don't know. I also want to be really tactful that I'm changing other people's lives too.
Right.
But at the same time, if he's just not talking to me because of the secret he's been trying to keep for his dad this whole time, that's also not fair to me, because I wasn't the adult that made this, that they've decided it was a bad decision, right? They've decided that this was something they're ashamed about, but I'm alive and I'm very happy to be here. Mm-hmm. Whether I was expected, not expected, wanted, not wanted, I'm here and I'm happy.
Imagine spitting into a tube, sending off your DNA, and unknowingly turning your life upside down. For me and thousands of others, this is our reality. I'm your host, Alexis Auerselt. In July of 2021, I discovered that I am an NPE, someone who has experienced a non-paternal event. In other words, my biological father isn't who I thought he was. This podcast shares the journeys of people who were shocked by a DNA discovery, mostly through modern DNA testing. We're telling the stories of NPEs, adoptees, and donor-conceived people and their families. This is DNA Surprises. Layla always knew that she was adopted by family. She also knew both of her birth parents, or so she thought. In this week's episode, Layla shares how she discovered she is an NPE and what she had to do to identify her biological father. She also discusses the many nuances of discovering a new ethnicity. Thank you for sharing your story, Layla.
I'm Layla. I'm 36 years old, and I'm originally from San Francisco, but now in Dixon, California. I've always known I was adopted. So my parents now, my adoptive and my adoptive mom and dad, who I just call mom and dad, my dad is my biological uncle. So my birth mom is his sister. It's actually something my family has done before and since. So my grandma had 12 kids, and with a lot of different husband issues. She was married twice until her third husband, who she didn't have children with. And so the last one, she couldn't afford the kids she had, let alone somebody else. So her sister, who couldn't have kids, adopted her. So this was really normal in my family. I'm sure many families, but it's happened a couple other times with uncles, just really common. And so as soon as I was born, my birth parents were substance abusers. And so I was taken away at the hospital immediately. I had drugs in my system. And so my dad and mom decided to adopt me. It was a battle for like 5 years. I was officially adopted at 5. And I think that's when they told me. Obviously, I think without knowing, I knew, because before I could form memories, like I was technically in foster care. My birth mom would come over for visitations to try and gain custody back when she showed up, because substance abuse is difficult. And so I always knew. And they always told me who my biological father was. I never met him. He died when I was 9. He was in the prison system. And he relinquished his rights because he's trying to be a good father and do what he thought was best, and knew he couldn't raise a kid. And so we always grew up talking about him. When he passed away, he didn't have relatives that would pick him up. So my dad had him cremated for me, which sounds kind of morbid, but it's also the sweetest thing my dad could have done. And we have him.
Yeah.
So I always knew. I don't know, being adopted and knowing is its own kind of journey. I didn't know it was a thing to feel out of place or feel different, because we didn't talk about adoption other than knowing I was adopted, but not that people could have issues from it or things like that. I thought I was just a normal teenager who didn't know who I was, right? I didn't understand until I became a therapist and started dissecting those things that this is slightly different. It's a little deeper. It's being taken away from your mom at birth, being addicted to substances when you're born, has its whole set of issues that I've been learning my entire life. I feel very well adjusted for it. Like, you hear stories in this community of people that are really upset. And I didn't understand that, because I know what my life would have been if I wasn't adopted. And I am thankful every day.
Yeah. Did you have a relationship with your mom?
A complicated one. So she was always around. I knew who she was. I always got upset as a kid because everybody would always say, "Oh, I'm Judy's daughter." And I'd be like, "I'm not her daughter." And I would get really upset because my parents worked really hard to build a life with me. And I was really close to my dad. Like, he and I were the closest. As I've grown up, me and my mom are really close. But he was like my mom growing up. He did all the traditional mom things. We were super tight. And so I always felt like that was disrespectful to my parents when people would say that, and I would get upset. And in addition to, she never showed up. And when she did, it was very much about her. She showed up to one of my uncle's funeral in a party dress, black, to be fair. So at least she did that. But it was a black party dress, and she got on stage and rambled in some substance-induced rambling. And she would I'm sure she had a difficult life. And she didn't do the work that she needed to do. And it was apparent, and it came across anytime we would visit. And I remember one time I was in high school getting ready for prom, junior prom. And she came over to see me in my dress to visit my grandma, and I put on the dress so she could see it. And probably the only time we talked in like the past 5 years, right? Because it was very sporadic. And I remember asking her to tell me about Peter, my birth dad. And I remember her saying, "It's just really hard for me to talk about," and didn't. And I'm just like, you selfish woman. Like, yeah, I'm sure it's hard for you to talk about. It's also hard to be adopted and not know anything about your family at all. I knew nothing. And nobody but him. And so I went to grad school. And in that, we do a genogram about your family. And my grandma was getting older. And I asked her about her kids, and she couldn't remember anybody's birthday, given she had 12 to remember. And she was getting older, so I got to give her some credit. So I decided to join Ancestry for free to kind of just get birth dates. And like, she would name people, like my uncle and my dad have similar names and like similar middle names. Like, it's just funny. It's so funny. I'm like, there's so many names. I know you had 12 kids, but you can think of any more.
Harder. Yeah.
Yeah. Like, my dad is Richard Eugene, and my uncle is Ricky Jean, which Ricky is just a nickname for Richard, and Jean is just half of Eugene. So it's just, it's so funny to me. Like,
it's very similar.
I went on to Ancestry, and I started looking up for birth dates, something as simple as that. And then I was like, well, I'm already on it. Let me just kind of see what I can find about my birth dad. And my birth mom told me that they were married. That was not true. There was no marriage certificate. They were not married. And then, but I did find out he was married before. And I was told I was his only child. That was the only thing we knew about him. My uncle, the Ricky, was also friends with him. So he secretly showed me a picture when I was a kid, because my dad was like, don't, but he didn't like to listen. So he showed me a photo. So he knew him. They were friends. They were, drug addicts together. But you find friendships,
Right.
And so I trusted what my uncle said, because I knew he would tell me things when people didn't want him to. My family is also really big on secret keeping in their own way, which has changed as I've become an adult. So it might just be secret keeping because I was too young to understand things, so I'll give him the benefit of the doubt there. So it turns out he was married to somebody before and had a daughter. So I'm in grad school trying to complete this genogram paper, and I find out I have a sister that I never knew about. And so I kind of give up on writing the paper. I start trying to find everything that I can, and was finally able to connect with her on Facebook. We never ended up meeting up. They had a difficult relationship because I think after she was born, he got into his substance abuse. And I don't think ever came back into her life. So that was a little complicated for her. And I'm sure she didn't know I existed, but she was pretty cool about it. Yeah. And my paper ended up becoming about how I found out I had a secret sister. And I got a great grade. So that worked out.
That's awesome. How did you feel when you discovered that? Like, what were your emotions?
You know, I think this is a theme about, because when I find out more later on, it's the same theme, is that I don't know if it's like shocked, but I don't like there weren't emotions like I would think there would be emotions. It was just kind of like, whoa, okay, this is interesting. And it wasn't like sadness or happiness. It was just like, whoa, I didn't expect that.
Yeah. So you connected with her on Facebook. What kind of led you to not meet? Was there no real connection there? What happened?
She lived really far away. So she lived like really upper Northern California in a very secluded space. Like she didn't even see her Facebook message for like a week because she just wasn't, she's a very neat lady. She's like kind of hippie-ish, kind of off the grid. And she just didn't come back down this way a lot. And then I think I just didn't keep trying. There was no actual reason. And I think about that sometimes. Like, did I feel something that I couldn't understand? I don't know. Because eventually I did meet some family of Peter's that was his half uncle. Because again, in this ancestry world, deep diving into these records, the person who I thought was my grandpa, like had this very mysterious birth certificate where I think his mom had a relationship with a married man. And so he ended up being adopted by her next husband when he was older. And so just there's already some weird stuff there that I never even got to find out about. But I met his younger half brother, and we were really close for a little while. He was much older. And he passed a couple years ago. But I went and visited him. He lived closer. He was in like the Sacramento area, and we visited a bit. I also think there are just some things in my life that I was getting overwhelmed by, and I pull back in general. So I think that had some to do with it.
So you aced your paper.
I did.
Connected with your sister, and you kind of continue on your journey connecting with Peter's family.
Yeah. And then I was just living my life. I was in a relationship that was really difficult for me, got married, finished grad school first, did all that, was just working and working and working. Then I got a divorce. I was like just feeling a new freedom, kind of getting back into who I was, and met somebody that he's my fiance now, met a really great guy, and he was super into ancestry. Like his family's from Scotland. He traced everybody back generations, just really, really into ancestry. And so we met at the end of 2019. The pandemic hit. I moved in with him because I was living with my older parents, and I worked in a field that was exposed all the time. And I didn't want to get them sick because this is the beginning. We thought it was like almost a death sentence if anybody got it. It was really scary. So he had let me move in with him, fresh out of dating. It was a quick move. But so bored during the pandemic when there's nothing to do outside of work is we were doing a lot of ancestry for him and looking into that. I'm like, let me just do this DNA test that I've been wanting to do for a little bit. So we sent that off. Didn't really think about it again, trying to wait for the results. Because again, with Peter's dad and not knowing who his dad was, we didn't really know what his genetics were. I only had a black and white photo of him, but he was not Irish. He was a lot more tan than Irish. I think we ended up thinking he was Portuguese from some of the ancestry stuff, but not knowing. So I was just trying to find out more about who I was with the lack of information. And so my DNA results come. I'm really excited. I open the app on my phone, and then I see the first 50 matches were African American. I'm very white. I'm very, very white. So I'm like, I look at him, I'm like, I think he gave me the wrong DNA results. And just names I'd never heard of. And then I see cousins on my birth mom's side. I'm like, okay, well, these are the right DNA results. And I must have been in some kind of shock that made my brain just not work, because I looked at my fiance. I'm like, I think this means that Peter might not be my biological father, like might. And he's looking at me, letting me think about it. I say it again, and he's like, I think it means he's not. And I'm like, oh. And I just, everything I always thought I was adopted, but I had the luxury of knowing who my biological parents were. And that's not something that's typical. And my friend, her mom had done a DNA test like a year before and found out her dad wasn't who she thought he was. And I remarked to my friend, I'm like, how lucky that won't be something that happens for me as an adopted kid. That's so rare. Here we are.
Once it kind of sets in, what are you thinking at that point?
Again, so I called my parents and I'm just like, this is wild. And I'm like, what do you know? What do you know? Because my dad would talk about Peter all the time. And I think that was his gift to me as the adopted kid, is he knew it was important for me to know where I came from. And it was important for me to know that me having a biological father wasn't going to change our relationship. Because we were so close, if I thought it would change our relationship, I would never look into anything, because that relationship is so important to me. So I think it was his gift to me to let me know it was okay to talk about him. It was okay to do these things. And so they were blown away. And they're like, no, she always told us it was Peter. We had no clue. And she's passed away. My uncle that might have known anything passed away. That was where she wore the party dresses to his funeral. Yeah, so there was nobody.
Did you recognize any of the matches?
No.
So these were just complete strangers to you?
Complete strangers, not a clue. And so I like to go from a feeling space and just go to a doing space. And that's what I did. I just started diving, and my fiance was amazing. And he was helping me dive and look into this stuff because he's really into it. And he traces family back generations and generations. But it was really hard to do this one because so many names kept linking to each other. So you couldn't tell kind of what line. I think people with the same name would marry. Even the most recent generation, where I was thinking who would be my grandparents, right? And I was looking at that level. And even two people that were married, both of her maiden name and his name were both the same last name. So I'm like, well, this is getting really complicated. And it was really hard. So I went to bed, like feeling defeated. We're just trying to track who my great-grandparents, who I thought would be my great-grandparents, who their kids were. And there were a lot of them, and we couldn't find them all. And I was just like, what line am I? Based on the matches for cousins, I started, like my first cousins, I started emailing everybody that I could. And it was also really tricky because somebody who was listed as the first cousin, that should be a second cousin, was throwing my results off. So I'm thinking, if he's a first cousin, this is who one of these uncles of his has to be who my father is. But he's actually a second cousin.
Okay.
So that was confusing. But I did find some other people who were great connections, really sweet people, really wanted to help, but couldn't answer anything. And so I went to bed. And again, I have the sweetest person in my life is I woke up to like one of those crime scene boards with Post-its all over the front door and in different colors, like color coordinated Post-its in the shape of like a family tree to find out. And I woke up, he's like, I figured it out. I know who you are, what line you came from. And I've been messaging with one of the kids to one of either her dad or her uncles is your biological father. Like I found it, I figured it out. She's messaging us. When she wakes up, we'll talk to her. And I was just in shock. Yeah. And so she ended up calling her dad. And this is where I did have some feelings come up because her dad, sweet man, is also kind of has his issues with addiction. And he's alive. And for me, I'm like, well, I can deal with a dad that has substance issues that's not alive, that I haven't met. And we're dealing with somebody that's not a human in front of me. I know how to deal with. Dealing with somebody that I could possibly meet was very, very scary to me. Dealing with somebody I could possibly meet who also has their struggles was really scary to me. Being a kid of people who have addiction issues, it makes you feel constantly on edge in a sense about, is this going to be my life? Is something going to trigger me? And that's scary to feel such despair that is something that brings you joy or just be stuck in that cycle, knowing it's not right for you and unable to get out of it is terrifying to me. My fiance was convinced that he was my dad. So she asked him, she's like, and she said my birth mom's full name. And she's like, do you know this woman? And he was like, oh my God, how do you know that name? So she's like, it's you. Is this your kid? Like, what's going on? And she's like, no. He said, no, that's not my kid. That's my dad's kid.
This episode is brought to you by Peacock. The new Peacock original documentary, Matthew Perry, A Hollywood Tragedy, dives deep into the beloved actor's rise to fame and his tragic death. 5 people, including Perry's personal assistant, 2 medical doctors, and an alleged Hollywood drug dealer known as the Ketamine Queen, were charged with conspiracy to illegally provide Perry with the ketamine. Explore the details of the case in this heartbreaking special, streaming now only on Peacock.
This episode is brought to you by Honda. Introducing the all-new, all-terrain Honda Passport Trail Sport, the most off-road capable Honda Passport Honda has ever dreamt up. The Passport features increased ground clearance, roof rails on all trims, and available specially developed all-terrain tires. And you'll stay comfortable with tri-zone climate control and available features like heated and ventilated front seats and a panoramic moonroof. Learn more at honda.com/passport.
Yeah.
So he knew about you.
Kind of. So there was a rumor. So his dad was in the military, really stand-up guy. But when he got older, he liked to party with younger women. And this was a thing that he knew, that his siblings knew. And he was still married, so it was like shameful for them in the family. And his older brother was like really in charge of making sure the mom wasn't getting hurt and things were like in order. Like he couldn't change his dad's behavior, but he could make sure his mom was okay, which is really noble. And he was one of the only people that didn't respond to me on Facebook, which was, I find interesting. I still haven't met him or talked to him. But what I guess my older brother heard is, his name's Wayne. He heard that his dad ended up getting my mom pregnant and paying her off to not talk about it. And which makes a little more sense with my mom never saying anything. Again, I can't ask her. Even if I could, I'm pretty sure I would still not know.
Right.
But so that's what he had heard. And this is the thing that I need to get another test just to confirm. But the fact that he even knew her name, they also lived in the same neighborhood. And so it makes sense to me. Also, when I saw a photo of him, I immediately looked at it and said, there's my nose. Because from an Italian family, they have very prominent features. And I was always like, oh, I didn't get this nose. And that's my biological family. And I'm like, oh, I don't have that nose. I also always had curly hair, like straight to my head, Corey's Matthews curls, that dropped when I was 8, got older. And it's like almost straight now. But I always, as a kid, had really curly hair that, again, like nobody in my family had curly hair. Peter's family didn't have curly hair. But I was always just trying to look for my nose. Peter didn't have my nose. Peter's family didn't have my nose. My family didn't have my nose. And why, of all features, I settled on that, I don't know. It was just one of those things. And I saw his photo, and it's like a black and white, slightly enhanced. It's from when he was in the Navy. And I'm like, that's my nose. So for me, I will get Wayne a DNA test just to confirm, which he's absolutely open to. His kids have been amazingly welcoming to me. They've linked me with their aunt, who's been also really amazing. She's like, you have my nose. And she's like, and you have the signature curls. And I'm like, oh, so it's wild. It's wild that my birth dad was like my grandma's age when I was born. So it's just, and it's one of those things that I don't have, like, I'm not shocked. I'm not angry. I'm not sad. I'm just like, whoa. I'm already adopted. I already don't know who my birth dad is. Never met them. And I'm like, this is just a wilder existence.
Is your birth father alive?
He is not. He passed away, I think 2009, if I'm not mistaken. He passed away. Okay. And so my genealogy says I'm Louisiana Creole. But that's where it gets hard, because Creole it's not white, it's not black, it's not French, it's not Spanish, it's just this blend. And so where I do have that side of family that is African American, I also have the side that's not quite. And so on my birth dad's Navy records, he was listed as because back then it was Negro. And that's what it's listed on his record. But you see photos of him, he's a very pale man. And I did have one cousin who showed up on my DNA results, messaged me on Facebook once, talked about it a little bit. And like the one thing she had to get out of the way first, she's like, by the way, your dad's not Black. And I'm like,
okay.
I'm like, I've seen photos of me and him. Like, I get it.
Right.
But I think that is something I'm learning is very big to certain people, is that where your lineage is. And like, so one lady that I was related to has this extensive family tree, but we're not linked. So I had to message her on Ancestry to see if I could get access to her tree. So she's like, I need to talk to you on the phone first. And I'm like, okay. And so on the phone, she's like, I need you to know a couple things. I need you to first know back in the day, there was a lot of intermarrying within the family, because the story is that our genes back up to this really famous enslaved woman. Like it's a really famous story where she was enslaved by this French family. And, you know, we call it rape because even if she consented in some way, you're enslaved. You can't consent.
Right.
And so they ended up having children. And when he was passing away, he wanted to give them this set of land. And when he passed, his kids from his wife fought it. So they only got like a very reduced amount of land. And the family really wanted to keep it in their family. There's no means for anybody back then. This was something really important to preserve. And so the intermarrying was to preserve what they inherited. And so that's what a lot of the DNA results show. And it also showed that some people stayed marrying African Americans and some people split completely. But you're listed what you're listed as the whole time. So there are some people that were like suing to change it, and it's just wild. And it's something I'm so removed from that I can't understand, but it's big to certain people in this community. So I think for my cousin who was Black, it was important to her to let me know, because I think for her, it mattered that her family stayed a certain way because they are not ashamed of their heritage. And I love that.
Yeah.
But it gets complicated, and there's dynamics I'm learning about that gets tricky.
Yeah. What are some of those dynamics that are complicated?
Is that one, many people in America who are white or white passing are descendant from enslaved people. That is a really big thing. And so you know, I'm from a very diverse area. And so knowing how triggering and traumatizing it is for the African American community to say, oh, look, there's Black in my family too, is like, it's a very big thing. And so, yeah, I don't have any wisdom or insight. I'm learning just like everybody else. And I'm just really open. And I have really great people in my life that I got to process this with, who could help me understand which side I needed to stay on, because I am a white woman and I need to be very mindful of how history has played out.
Yeah, that's interesting. So you identify as white.
You know, I don't even think I had a choice in the matter. Growing up in a very diverse community, I was told I was white.
Yeah.
And there was somebody we gone to school from junior high and elementary school, ended up in the same high school, who she picked on me a little bit. And she would always say, you're the white girl. And when we got to high school, she ended up overhearing me say how my grandma was Italian. She looked at me, she's like, Italian's not white. I'm like, well, you've been calling me white my whole life. So I guess Italian's white now. I don't know.
Yeah.
And that goes into, I always hated the questions about what were your traditions? What is your culture? What's your identity? I always, still to this day, I hate the question. I hate the question boxes. I'm like, I don't know. Even right now, like my dad is technically Black according to the US Census, you know, and I'm still being told, no, you're white, which is fine. Cause I am white and I want to be very sensitive to, even if I'm not white, I'm white passing. I'm, you know, I feel like that just complicated things further. Now I extra don't know who I am. But it also lets you know, because I think the biggest thing from this is that it matters. Who we are matters. But at the same time, I am no different today than I was when I was 15. And my identity is completely shifted on paper. But I'm still the same person. I'm not different.
Yeah. I think that the mixed race experience is so unique, and that's not to take away from anyone else's experience by any means. It's kind of like both things can be true, right?
Yeah,
it is extremely complicated, obviously, to be a Black American. It is also complicated to be mixed race and try and figure out, okay, because everyone wants to put you in a box, right?
Yes.
And figuring out which box do I belong in? I don't. How do I identify? And that kind of thing. So that's why I was curious, what your experience has been since you had this revelation, and has it changed how you identify? So interesting.
And in a sense, I've always felt really a certain way about Louisiana. And I've never gotten to visit it. I never traveled much as a kid. And I got to go November 2019. So right before this all started, for the first time I went, and it felt so special when I was there. And I'm thinking, well, Louisiana's magical, right? So it's probably just because it's this magical place. And now I'm like, did I know? Did something in my being know? And I don't know. I could just be being silly. But I've always had this love for it from afar, and being in it just before this all happened, I felt magical. And I still have family from back there. My birth dad was born there. He's from Louisiana. And most of my cousins, and who I've been calling my cousins half this time, are technically my niece and my nephew.
Okay.
Because originally I thought their dad might be my dad, but they're technically my niece and my nephew, even though they're older than me. Mm-hmm. But they're from Louisiana. They've gone back there. They have family there. So I want to explore that part more once we can travel a little more freely, once we can meet people. I really do want to meet that side of the family. And I think I want to understand more of who my biological dad was, because I don't know how he identified. I don't know how he felt about all that. And I think once I know who he identified as, that might help me understand what part of my heritage I get to claim and be proud of, because I don't want to take somebody else's.
So have you been able to build more of a relationship with any of those people, like Wayne or your niece you initially connected to?
My niece, we talked a little bit. She lives in Oregon and has spotty reception. But we talk a bit and on Facebook. But her brother, Levi, we message probably weekly. And he talks to my fiance all the time. Yeah, so he's probably the one I've been closest to.
So what was the reaction of your adoptive parents and your fiance? Like, once you kind of all processed this, what has the reaction been?
I think my parents are just intrigued. I think my dad is just in general, he's a more stoic man and doesn't share his emotions a lot. But I think there's a piece of him that, he knows his sister made some decisions in her life that made her life harder and made the family's life a little more difficult. And I think for him, hearing that she was sleeping with a much older man was really difficult for him to hear. I think that was probably the most uncomfortable thing for him. Mm-hmm. And I think they were more so, how do you feel? Are you okay? And then, wow, what a wild story. But yeah, they're supportive. They just want to make sure I'm okay, whatever I find out. But they're really supportive. And I think it's just like why as soon as I heard that your podcast existed, I went and binged all the episodes. These are fascinating stories. Yes, it's people's lives, but they kind of almost play out as TV shows, right? Yeah. These are like TV-worthy experiences that we have, and not everybody gets that kind of life. So it's just kind of fascinating, and they want to know more. I want to know more. My fiance is really excited about it.
Do you have any questions for your mom? I know that she's passed and you can't ask her, but is there anything that you've thought over time? Because I hear this from other NPEs whose parents have since passed, like that you're like, I wish I could ask my mom this. Do you have any of those questions?
I think it goes back to asking her about who I thought my birth dad was at the time. And I don't think I spent a lot of time wondering those things because I tried. And I know she wouldn't have answered them. So I don't spend a lot of time thinking about that. But I think as a therapist, I just want to know about her and her life. And I think, growing up, I said I was very, very close to my dad. Me and my mom, it was a little rougher. We had a rough time when I was a kid, especially my teenage years. I'm sure it was just such a joy, right? Yeah. And so we had a really tough time. And I learned when me and my mom don't live together, we are the best of friends. I call my mom so much that she's like, please stop. But especially like every Friday we're talking, we have such a great relationship. And part of having that great relationship was getting to know her as a human, not as my mom, but as a person. And I'm like, oh, I get why you did this thing in my childhood that caused me such grief, because this was happening for you. And you were doing the absolute, I'm going to get choked up. You were doing the absolute best that you could. And I couldn't see that because I was a teenager worried about me and thinking that you were just being mean and not that you were working with everything that you could. Her mom wasn't like touchy-feely, lovey mom, and she didn't know how to do that. And my dad, who was not touchy-feely growing up, everybody still jokes that it's just so weird how good he is with children and how loving he is with children and animals, because he's just really like a stiff guy. That no emotion, no love. But with kids and animals, there's this spark and this joy, and he lights up. And I got so much of that love from him. And but everybody I grew up with, it was their mom. And I'm like, well, why can't my mom show me this? And I was so sad. And then I stopped being all in my feelings and kind of used some of the tools I learned as a therapist of just listening and asking questions. And it's been such a trip getting to know your parents as human beings. It's the wildest thing, and I'm such a big fan of it. Which I'm sure it's not revolutionary. People probably figured this out well before me, loved doing it, and I was maybe too just egocentric to figure it out. But it's just been the most cool experience. So that's what I wish. I don't have a question for my mom, my birth mom, but I wish I could understand who she was. I know it was tough for her. Taking substances, you're filling something. Whatever going on in your life is worse than all the consequences from your use. And there are a lot of consequences that feel really crummy. So whatever you are using that to cope with must be bad. So I know things were tough for her, but I want to know more. I want to understand who she was as a kid, where she got to as a teenager that this was going on, and how she felt as an adult. I think being an adult also just sometimes, even adults, you make bad decisions because you're learning things and you're growing and you're exploring, and partying and substance use is fun exploratory for some people. If you're a substance addict, it's not fun and exploratory. It's tough. Especially if you have kids in the mix. But just knowing who I want to know, where did you meet this man? Which was the neighborhood. I know that much, but what on earth were you doing? And I'm sure there's, as much as there's probably some cringeworthy stories, being an adult, making my own mistakes, I know there's probably some really good, fun stories of her learning about herself. And that's who I want to know. I want to know who she was outside of the addiction, because that's all I've ever known of her is her being in this addiction. And what made her happy? What did she like? I don't know any of those things.
I really like that. Do you have some of those same questions about your father, your birth father?
Oh, I have that and more. I still don't know anything about his parents. I want photos, and nobody I've talked to yet has photos. I'm pretty sure the his son that I haven't talked to yet might have. He seems more of kind of the story keeper of the family and the history keeper, which I might be wrong about, but that's kind of the vibe I'm getting from stories. And knowing who his parents were. He was in the Navy. What stories did he have? I just want to know who he was as a human too. Also, the big thing with people that are adopted, what are there any health concerns I should be worried about? Which is always the question when you don't know. And that's one of the big things that I tried so much to look into Peter's life is I don't know what might be in store for me that I could know about and prevent.
Right. Yeah, that's so important to people when they have either through adoption or an NPE. Yeah, it's kind of the overlap there. What are some things that have helped you through this journey? I mean, it seems like you are pretty well adjusted, like you said, in terms of the adoption piece, but in kind of the whole new cultural identity and unexpected father that appeared. How have you been processing that?
I think I have some really great people in my life. I worked at an agency when I was finding this out, where one of my staff that I worked with lets me be really human. She is a Black woman, and she is amazing and listened to me. And I think that's really helpful, having people that you can talk to, especially I don't know how to navigate that. And And asking people of color how to navigate that is not good. We have to do research on our own, and I do understand all of that. But you also need a human to be like, girl, you're tripping. Stop it. Calm down. Or no, that's a really good question. Look more into that. And so she gave me the grace of being that kind of that board to talk to a little bit. And it's probably just a small, insignificant conversation to her. But for me, it was big. And she's still somebody that's important in my life. And I think just having a solid set of people that you could talk to. I know that I could go to my parents for anything and they'll listen to me, and having that is really great. My fiance is the same. Just really, I went to sleep and I woke up and he solved the puzzle for me.
That's amazing.
He is the most amazing man I've ever met. And so he's been really great with this. And when I went to go meet Wayne, because he didn't have a cell phone, so we had to just go to my old neighborhood and like go knock on a door. And I'm like, I don't know who this guy is. And so he drove, like at the time we were living like an hour plus away. And so he just drove with me to sit in the car. He's like, no, this is your special time. He's like, I'm going to be at the door until you tell me you're okay. And then I'm going to go walk away. And that's what he did. And he sat in the car the whole time. I was talking to him and just to make sure I was okay and I was comfortable. And that's sweet. And I know that's not the circumstances everybody has, especially listening to your podcast, that knowing that a lot of people that have been supports for them, even if they did have really close relationships, weren't talking to them about it. And to like, if it was my mom hiding this, and she's both of my parents are such a great sounding board for me. And then all of a sudden it's a secret for them and they stop talking to me about it. That would just, what do you do with that? That's tough. So I think continuing to have that sounding board and talking through this is one of the biggest things for me.
Yeah. I want to go back to, you said that you did meet Wayne. So yes. What was that like? You decided to meet up with him and then what?
Awkward. So awkward. It's like, hi, stranger that I've never met. Tell me all these things. And it was the pandemic. So early pandemic. This was like July, probably, I found out. Again, I was still working in person with an at-risk population. So I was just like, I'm not trying to give you COVID. I'm not trying to catch COVID. So we kind of talked in his doorway. And so that's weird and awkward. And the goal is to go out to lunch. And it's hard because I haven't been out there. And then again, trying to just be human in a pandemic. I'm giving myself grace. I don't like to people a lot right now. It's tough. So I don't know, maybe there's this hesitation that I haven't spoken out loud about what happens if he does take the DNA test and I go on another ride, right? Which I don't think is going to happen. I'm pretty convinced. I believe his story. It matches up. He was able to tell me names that I didn't give him. So I believe him 100%. But just because that's what my mom told them, clearly now we've established she doesn't always tell the truth.
Right. So, well, you know that you're biologically related to that family.
That's true too. That is true too. Thank you. You're helping me solve my own problems right now.
There's some risk or question mark around.
Yes,
sure. Is Wayne your brother?
Yes. So yeah, you know what? I think after this, I'm gonna pull the trigger. I'm gonna go on Amazon Ancestry after this. I'm gonna order that test. And then once it comes, then I have to go get to Wayne's house. But I think it's the last piece of the puzzle, which I have to do.
So that's what's next, is that 100% confirmation.
Yeah.
Who your bio dad is.
Yes.
Where would you say that you're at now with everything? How do you feel?
I feel like I want to know more about life in Louisiana and how that was. And I think that's a piece that, I don't know, when you're always asked as a kid what your family traditions are, what culture you are, all these things, and never knowing what to answer, it always feels like a strange question. That is like the first time I felt that something was actually identified. Like, my grandma's Italian, her parents came from Italy. So I feel very strong to the Italian side. Even if I'm not mostly Italian, that was something that was clearly defined for me that I can grab onto and use for my identity. And she brought some of the Italian traditions, wine with dinner, making focaccia, all those things. And seeing that, oh, you're Louisiana Creole, I'm like, that's something that is also clearly identified and feels nice to be able to pinpoint something, even if I can't define the other pieces of it. I'm just really liking Louisiana and wanting to know more about that. So I think I want to know more about Louisiana, but I feel well-adjusted. I feel like I know who I am. I would love to hear more stories. I would love to see pictures. I'm getting married. I hope to have a family of my own. I want pictures and stories to be able to tell my kids. I hope that they don't feel as lost as I always felt.
That's so true. That breaking that cycle is, I think, key for so many of us.
It's a much more common journey than we know. Especially as I know a lot of people are finding out since Ancestry and 23andMe have come out and all the other genetic testing. It's a lot of people's world are going to get rocked that have no clue. And just being prepared to, if it's your friend, if it's your family member, being prepared to listen. Because I know a lot of people make a lot of comments when those things come up. And in that moment, we just need a sounding board to share our bemusement, our curiosity, our shock, our horror, whatever it is, or sadness, especially if, some sadness, maybe happiness for some people, just whatever feeling it is, we don't know what it is yet, and don't tell us what it is. Just give us some space to figure it out.
Yeah, that's really great advice for anyone supporting someone going through this.
Yeah.
What advice would you give a parent who might be hiding a DNA surprise from their child?
Don't do it. Somebody's going to figure it out. And if you're scared that they're going to figure it out when you're alive, that stinks. But they're going to be a lot more mad at you or sad, hurt if you didn't tell them. And if they find out after you're gone, that just amplifies it, because not only are they going to feel all those feelings, and then now you feel like there's a lost opportunity to figure out the truth. And I would tell them, put yourself in somebody's shoes. And I know it's hard. You can't really know. You can speculate on how you would feel. And especially if you're trying to pretend that you wouldn't be as hurt as somebody is, and you're trying to pretend, oh, I would be just fine. But really try and put yourself in somebody's shoes. How betrayed would you feel if nobody told you? How sad would you feel to not be told? How would you feel to not really know who you were and feel like you have to refigure out your life at 30 or whatever age, So don't do it. Somebody's going to find out. You could only keep it away from so long if your kids are dead against doing a DNA test, so you think they're never going to find out. Their kids might not. Their grandkids might not. And then they're going to find out at 90. And what is that?
Oh, such a good point. Such a good point. What advice would you give someone who just discovered that they are an NPE?
Feel your feelings. Anything that you feel is valid. Have somebody to talk to about it. Your friends and family are great if they're good listeners, but sometimes they can't even get it, because who can? Who can?
Yeah.
I am obviously a therapist, so I obviously really recommend therapy if you feel that you need it. Therapy is amazing, but also that might change you in some external sense, but you are not different from who you were yesterday. You are still you. Your values are still your values. And those values can change every day. You can change every day. But at your core, you are no different than the day before you found out.
I love that. I love that advice. Layla, thank you so much for coming on and sharing such a unique story. I think having the adoptive piece and then also the NPE piece is so unique. And yet I still think you will probably help someone who is listening who has gone through something similar. So thank you for sharing your story.
Thank you so much for your time. This was just a blast to do. It's such a blast. I had so much fun.
Thanks again to Layla for sharing her story. If you have a DNA surprise that you'd like to share, please email dnasurprises@gmail.com. And if you haven't yet, please rate, review, and subscribe to the podcast on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. Until next time.